When it comes to talking about the major players of the Paramount War, Summit War, or whatever translation of the story from Sabaody to the time skip you prefer, the obvious names to talk about would be Whitebeard or Ace. But this video by the Hidden Island already said everything that I would and more, whereas an Ace video would have to be more overarching than primarily his role at Marineford, which makes a more prime candidate for this arc-by-arc series. Akainu, the closest this partially ensemble arc has to a main villain. Though there will be some mentions of later events, this analysis will primarily concern his role prior, during, and immediately after Marineford. Before we are introduced to his present self, his role at Ohara already informs the audience of Sakazuki's absolute justice and his desire to nip potential problems in the bud if someone's bloodline implies predispositions that can't be ignored. When he fully displays this in viewing Ace and Luffy as targets he must eliminate due to their bloodlines, it becomes apparent Akainu is the Marine who most vehemently opposes one of One Piece's core ideals, of the predispositions of genetics not predetermining someone's fate. Despite that, he isn't ignorant enough to view all pirates as the same, with him having the intelligence to manipulate squads by preying on his feelings of fear or revenge, or on Ace with insults that wouldn't work on those not as prideful. It's no surprise that his opponent at Marineford is Whitebeard. Not only does Whitebeard represent the idea of found family to a greater degree than any pirate within the series, yes, even the Straw Hats, but is also one of the contenders for the most noble and heroic displays of a pirate, whereas Akainu's actions display the despicable nature of absolute justice, ironically achieved through the underhanded methods expected of his lawless foes. One thing not mentioned often though, despite his role against Ace and Luffy, is how he acts as a parallel to them. Whereas the two sworn brothers represent the next pirate generation, Sakazuki's role after the war, including the relocation of Marine headquarters and the new admirals being from outside his subordinates or the vice admirals of other units, show him as wanting to renovate the Marines and avoid past failings in making his ideals and justice the heart of the Marines after the end of an era. We get a look at his disdain at Marines that go against his absolute justice at Marineford, not just with the execution of a fleeing subordinate or attempting to stop Kobe's plea, but in him not treating Garp as an exception to Luffy's bad blood, and showing how much he disagrees with Garp's conduct as a Marine in a very subtle way. Perhaps the greatest quality that stands out in Akainu's role as a villain is his efficient attitude, with how even the more meticulous One Piece villains can get overconfident in their success, or how incompetent some are. The perfect display of this part of Akainu is in the events leading to him springing into action. Using Kenbunshoku Haki to sense Whitebeard's arrival, he doesn't take needless action that could disrupt his concentration until Jozu forces his hand, and when he does, that act is one that destroys Whitebeard's ships, later doing the same to the Moby Dick when most of Whitebeard's forces were deep enough into the battle to prevent an immediate retreat. It's with this that we see Akainu knowing when to best attack and when to not, and, along with him not getting between his peers and Luffy, knowing how best to work with the other admirals and not disrupt them. He continues to display efficient strikes against his enemies throughout the war, viewing Ace and Luffy as his main targets, as well as trying to execute Kobe for the crime of wasting seconds that could be spent letting him catch up to Law's submarine. This extends to his character design and demeanour, with him as of yet being one of the few antagonists to not fall prey to gags or present a more casual side. The most comparable one to him tonally would be Rob Lucci, and it's when comparing their two brands of justice that we see the more layered aspects of Akainu's absolute justice. Whereas Lucci's dark justice is no more than him getting an excuse to kill people he wants for the government with impunity, Sakazuki's actions, both as Admiral and Fleet Admiral, are genuinely for what he believes will make the world secure, and he isn't entirely wrong when it comes to the current state of the world. One of Marineford's greatest attributes is in highlighting the extremes and shades of grey that muddy both sides. Though Luffy or Whitebeard may showcase the best qualities of a pirate lifestyle of living freely can provide, the Blackbeard pirates represent everything the Marines wish to avoid, in him living by the extremes of a do-as-thou-wilt attitude, every bit as much as their Tenryubito, the latter of whom are not those Sakazuki is shown to have personal respect for. Though both Akainu and Blackbeard are extremes, it is difficult to argue against Sakazuki's more authoritarian attitude providing more worth than pure anarchy when it comes to the safety of the average person caught between both ends, and his brand of justice will always have a place as long as people such as Teach exist, or until the warrior of liberation helps bring forth an alternative. We see this not only with the loyalty many vice admirals have to adopting his methods, but to the unity of the Marines having not weakened during his leadership, and, if anything, having strengthened as a group. After the war, it's fitting that Akainu is the one to come after Bonnie. I won't go over how her family influenced his decision, with how dated what I could say could become with how Bonnie escaped from him, but Akainu admitting being worried at her fleeing the Marines says a lot when considering what typically unnerves him. We must wait and see for this, but one thing we know is that he was at least willing to confirm her father's fate to her, and show his ability to be reasonable towards his enemies when necessary. Finally, it's worth going over his real name, Sakazuki. This being the name of a sake ritual not only makes it fitting that he is the one to bring Ace and Luffy's sake-bound brotherhood to an untimely end, but also has him serve as a metaphor towards each Marine adopting the new brand of justice, being akin to a Sakazuki towards an institute. In much the same way, the ritual has become associated with the Yakuza, which tie into Akainu's character design, making it perfect the Marine's justice under his command is an extreme path, or Gokudo. It's through these actions that, despite his limited screen time at and just after Marineford, Akainu cements himself as one of One Piece's greatest villains, and one of the series' most engaging characters, regardless of whether or not current events have him stick by his ideals. As you can expect, the next video will be on Fishman Island, going over the most obvious talking point of the narrative.